Welcome to the Data Privacy Party installment. I'm your host, Hunter Winfield. This is the party where we talk about privacy regulation, technology, and hope that you learn something new today. The goal of this party is to just bring free information to as many people as we possibly can. If you guys will notice, I'm wearing a 2020 Austin Marathon shirt in honor of what's coming up next weekend as of this recording. And I'll be running the marathon. I guess I didn't get enough action the first time around, so it's time for round two. So make sure you keep me in your thoughts and prayers, and hopefully we can come out alive on this one. But yeah, other than that, I also have my college basketball team playing in front of me, so there may be some instances when I'll get excited or disappointed, just kind of based on what ends up happening. So with that, let's go ahead and get this show started. So if y'all remember in the last installment, I apologize, this is coming out a week late. Just didn't get around to doing it last weekend. So week late, but we're here, so it gives us a little bit more information to cover as far as what ended up happening over the past month or so, kind of some of the big stuff that we want to talk about. So this first part, we'll just talk through some of the latest breach news that ended up happening. We're primarily going to stick to GDPR fines and a HIPAA wall of shame. We'll cover a few of them that kind of stick out. So some of the biggest ones that ended up happening over the last month or so, back on January 19th, WhatsApp Ireland got hit with a €5.5 million fine, one of the largest ones that ended up coming through. And to cover a little bit, there's actually quite a bit of information around it. GDPR does have an enforcement tracker that helps give a good outline of what's going on. So anyway, this one was in violation of a couple articles, but essentially there was this insufficient legal basis for processing, individuals' information that are part of the European Union, where GDPR applies. Doesn't apply in America, in case those of you were wondering about that. Only to European citizens and states covered by the Union. Next big one, a private citizen, just kind of funny. I wanted to include on here on January 20th in 2023, in Spain, there was a citizen. So citizens can take private right of action against other citizens based on what the GDPR allows. This individual installed video surveillance cameras around the neighborhood, and so did so without the consent of anyone else, for reasons that may or may not have been justified or just pure in nature, but regardless, without the consent there, and kind of lawfulness of collecting that information, yeah, you're going to get fined. Meta platforms in their Ireland branch got hit with €390 million. That's actually one of the largest GDPR fines ever. That was levied back on January 4th, and I do actually want to click over to that one and try to give a brief summary, because that one's just kind of real impactful. Just non-compliance with GDPR processing rules, a couple articles in violation, and there's just some good information on there. So as you know, before I go through the next two, on our website, dataprivacyparty.com, did recently publish a piece going into the 5 largest fines in GDPR history, and then that gives a little bit more backstory. So some of the stuff I'll mention here, you can go over to the website and check that out for a little more detail. The next one that stood out, Vodafone in Spain, back on January 16th, 56,000 euros, and then Intelexa, 50,000 back on January 13th. That was in Greece when that one happened. Some big ones from HIPAA that we'll navigate over to. These are kind of, like originally I was only going to mention 3, but there was a large one that happened this past month, so I thought it was worth including that. But healthcare provider, community psychiatry management in North Carolina back on January 10th had a likely phishing scam that caused an unauthorized third party to be able to access the system back in 2022 in March and June to just exfiltrate some data. 193 approximately 1,000 individuals affected. So for those of you that are not familiar with HIPAA's breach notification, 500 or more individuals affected, that one will be reported to the Office for Civil Rights and then gets put on the wall of shame. So all of us can look at it and learn from it, hopefully. Next biggest one, Health Plan of San Mateo. This is in California back on January 18th. 4,032 individuals were affected, and this is just a hack of their information network. Cole and Van Note, this is a consumer rights law firm, is currently investigating the incident. And so just because I mentioned it on here doesn't mean they've concluded in any investigations. It just means that that's when they had to report the breach when it occurred. So that's when it goes up on the wall, regardless of the outcome of any investigation that ends up happening. Third one that stuck out, Inscripts. This is the business associates. The last one I just forgot to mention. Health Plan of San Mateo is in fact a health plan. So you'll get healthcare providers, health plans, business associates. Try to kind of circle all three of them. Inscripts. This is a business associate in California. January 17th, 66,372 individuals were affected. This was just an authorized party getting access to the consumer's EPHI, possibly over other sensitive data not related to consumers, but it could just be related to business associates, LP. But currently, they're still investigating, everything that happened and how it could have been prevented. Notification was sent out to all of the affected individuals back on January 17th. So hopefully you're not one of those. If you are, I really hope that you've heard from those companies. They are required by law, by HIPAA's breach notification rule, to send out notifications to all affected individuals. I can't remember off the top of my head the timing, but basically without undue delay is the common practice that we've seen on a lot of breach notification laws. So I hope that happened. The last one I wanted to include, this is kind of various groups were affected. And if you're interested, you can kind of go check out the HIPAA Wall of Shame. But on February 1st, over 3 million people, this was out of California. There were several groups affected. I'm not going to mention all of them, but over 3 million, approximately 3.3 million people were affected by essentially a hack of network servers by various groups that included health plans, business associates, and so on. So hopefully if you were involved in something like that, you've already received notification of it and are taking steps to prevent any sort of negative outcome from that. A few other reported breaches that happen that may or may not be related to individuals, information. So T-Mobile back on January 19th had data of 37 million individuals stolen. This incident actually occurred November 22. It wasn't officially reported until January. So if you're one of them, I'm not. I don't use T-Mobile as my cellular provider, but if you were, I sincerely hope that you heard from them and were able to take measures to protect yourself if your information was stolen. Twitter, I think this is kind of a little more in the back of a lot of folks' minds, but data of over 200 million Twitter individuals were dropped on breach forums, which is a public forum that anyone can access with the right know-how, but essentially emails, names, addresses, usernames are all exposed. The data was scraped using an API vulnerability in Twitter's software. PayPal reports credential stuffing attacks affected about 35,000 people. Basically, a hacker leveraged a password and other data was exposed online. So they used what sounds like just essential, they call it brute force or whatever you want to call it. They took the password. They were able to scrape a bunch of information from individuals online, put together a couple common usernames that may be the case, and we're able to infiltrate PayPal's network and steal a bunch of information. 3 others we'll kind of get to later on. GoodRx recently, FTC, well, all 3 of these, as a matter of fact, FTC is investigating some incidents for GoodRx, Chegg, and Drizzly. So anyone that's getting prescription drugs at cheap prices, I hope, or using Chegg. I know I used it when I was in grad school. And then Drizzly as well, for those of you that like to consume some of the sparkling water, whatever it is that they sell. I personally don't, but there was all breaches. We'll get to that later on. There's a new section, and please give me some feedback on what y'all may think. I'll read it off a little bit later, but it's basically in the spoil sports section. So the main topic, and I remember, if y'all remember, I mentioned it a while back, we're going to be kind of going through a 10-part series around the introduction to privacy. As a matter of fact, this book back here, for those of you that are trying to study for the CIPT or CIPP, this book is something that I recently finished up reading, and I think it'd be valuable to kind of bring that information onto the podcast. Hopefully be a good learning series for a lot of folks. So a lot of this is just going to be me going through some of the stuff just earlier on. We'll go through chapter 1 today. This is essentially just an introduction to privacy and kind of what is it. A lot of folks listening may kind of have a good concept of it, but it'd just be good to bring back up and refer to what exactly are we looking for. Why do we even have this concept of privacy in the first place? Because some people had to lay the groundwork at one point in time. For those of us that are coming in a little bit later to the game, that weren't around back in the 60s and the 50s to start to come up with these ideas, we get to use them now that other folks have kind of put them in play, which is exactly what happens with almost anything nowadays. So loosely defined, excuse me, privacy is, in a very easy to understand definition, the right to be left alone. An individual has control over who has access to their information, and also has control over the amount of information that a person has that access to, how much information of theirs gets leaked out to the world. They have full control over their own information and are able to restrict appropriately who it is that can actually access that information. So that leads us into some of these, why do we even, care about the definition of privacy? What makes it so that we need to be cognizant of those different areas? So we're going to look at a couple ideas that some folks have come up with in the past. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with these. For those of you that want to know more, you can either kind of look them up on your own time. Definitely get the book if you're interested in learning more, because it covers almost too much information, to be quite honest. But I'll kind of talk through some of these a little bit, and hopefully this is something that's valuable to y'all. Alan Weston, his definition that there are 4 states of privacy, basically. These 4 are that you have solitude, which is, your right to be left alone. And no one can be able to intrude on that solitude unless you allow them to. That goes back to the definition that we were talking about earlier, that privacy is not just the right to be left alone, but also you control who has access to information, who you can allow that access to, how much information is out there. So your right to be left alone. The next state is intimacy. So this is a small secret group. This is kind of, you allow a small secret, doesn't have necessarily be secret, I guess, but a smaller group of people have access to your information. Typically, families, friend groups, they kind of have a little bit more knowledge of what you are, some of the stuff about you that you probably don't want to tell other people just in casual conversations, or you meet strangers on the street. Coworkers could be in this group if you're close to them. I think there's been a big push lately for a lot of people to try to be more connected to coworkers. I mean, that's definitely where a lot of us feel a very sense of community, and a lot of companies have tried to get that ball rolling, which some do a great job. I think there's, your large ones that have tried to even come up with more of a fun work environment, like Indeed and Google and so on. But then there's also some smaller ones. I know here I live in Austin, Texas, and so you see quite a bit of folks pushing for not necessarily more laid back conditions, but just more accommodating areas. I tell you, the place that I work at, and this is probably true for most spots, but just having available snacks and other stuff in the break room, to where if you need some kind of pick me up either in the morning or in the afternoon, it's readily available, and stuff comes in all the time. So there's other stuff too I know that people enjoy thoroughly, having the ability to come and go, flexible work hours and so on. Anyway, that's starting to get a little off topic. So essentially, the intimacy is that second state that we talked about. This is small secret groups of folks knowing a little bit more information about you than you probably would tell other people outside of your group. Third state is anonymity. You can have a public persona, but you are not able to be identified. This is kind of akin to having the generic username one online in a forum or group kind of thing. Or it could even be you're in a crowd, but you're still not able to be pointed out. You can be around, you can move around publicly, but you're not going to be identified. Your identity is still protected, even though you're able to be kind of more in the public eye. The fourth and final one of Alan Weston's four states is the reserve. So this essentially, you're part of a large group with the ability to disengage from that group whenever you choose to. So this can be a whole number of different examples. Work could be one of them. For instance, a group of coworkers, if you have a lot of them. I know for an example I'll use is essentially you can be part of Austin FC's, which is our soccer team we have here. You can be a fan and a part of that group, but you still have the ability to disengage from, whether it's going to games or going to different networking hangout events that they put together. You can kind of remove yourself from that group as freely as you choose, because you're not locked in or anything like that. You can come and go as you please. So these characterize individual expectations of privacy, and kind of in a way how IT might work to achieve or possibly conflict with those expectations. So we kind of see different systems, especially during the whole, and they're still kind of going on, but the big data craze that happened 5 to 10 years ago, where you just collect as much data as you can so we can use it to make better decisions. There wasn't very much governance around a lot of that data, and so it kind of created some conflicts. Individuals were able to be identified. Target is always a good example to bring up, because there was a woman who was shopping, and based on what she was purchasing, Target was able to identify that she was pregnant before she even was able to figure that out, which is definitely the best example of something like that. But there's plenty of other examples out there. This next one, I personally like this one quite a bit. Matter of fact, these next two I do like quite a bit that I'll go through, but this first one, Helen Nissenbaum's contextual integrity. So this is, and this probably gets a little more subjective, but we can refer to history as our objective lens if we're looking through. Privacy is norms that should govern information access. So these norms can be domain specific, banking, technology, retail, or they can be context specific. So you're going to the store, for example, what sort of information are you going to willingly or unwillingly provide? What kind of what's going on, and what are the privacy implications around what's going on? Do you want to go to the store anonymously, or do you want them to know you're there so that when you go, your phone can suggest things that you typically buy, or maybe something that complements an item that you typically buy, or something that's on sale? It knows that you're in the store, and so you can go and grab those items, which otherwise you would have no idea without being informed by the store's surveillance. So, that's hints on another area too, with surveillance kind of and interrogation do lead to that information disclosure. So that's something we just talked about as well with surveillance, and I mean interrogation too. It kind of sounds like a pretty harsh word to use, but that's essentially just extracting information from somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be through physical bodily harm to someone, but it can just be manipulation as well in order to get some information from somebody. So it can take on a different forms for sure, but using interrogation and surveillance as our example to compel the information disclosure. You go to the store, and maybe the store doesn't already know you're there, but you take a survey. When you show up, maybe every phone that connects to their Wi-Fi automatically pulls this information up, and it's products that you prefer to buy, it's products you want. Oh my goodness. Sorry, watching the game. Products you want to buy, products that you may need, and through taking that survey, they also collect some demographic information from you. And so now they know next time you come in, Hunter likes to buy bread, and what goes great with bread is butter. So we're going to recommend butter. And Hunter said he likes to save money, so we're also going to recommend the butter that's on sale. Whether it could be that it's about to go bad, so I would advise caution when purchasing butter that's on sale. Anyway, if I were to fill out the survey, they know I like bread, they'll recommend butter as a complimentary thing. So I go ahead, I buy it, I come back to the store, I hook up to the Wi-Fi on my phone, they already know I'm there. They'll say, okay, we're doing a special on rye bread. I personally am not a huge fan of rye bread, so I probably would pass, but they know I'm here, they know I like bread, so they're going to recommend something like that I might be interested in. So in a way, they interrogated me, and they also surveil me in order to compel more information disclosure. If I were to buy the rye bread, then okay, he doesn't just like French bread, he also likes rye bread. So we're going to recommend maybe some turkey, lettuce, maybe some Colby Jack cheese, maybe some Chipotle mayonnaise. And here I go, now I have a sandwich rather than just eating bread and butter like I was doing the week prior. So it's one of those things. It can be helpful, but it can also be harmful, especially if you prefer just to go to the store to do your own thing and don't necessarily want a lot of this stuff that just kind of tracks most of your movement. And there's different controls someone can put in place to guard around, when you go to the store, if you don't connect to the Wi-Fi network, they may not be able to see you unless they kind of have some sort of geofence around their store that can identify your phone when it walks through. But anyway, that's different. Another conversation. But one of the things that is a challenge, I guess it would say, so we kind of talked through a bunch of different stuff just now. That was all primarily context specific, not necessarily domain specific. Now I know we mentioned retail, banking, some other things. So, banking, for example, Gramm-Leach-Bliley protects basically the privacy law around financial institutions and their customers that they serve. But it all kind of circles back to the reason that this contextual integrity model can be challenging is because it is difficult to identify norms in new or changing technology. Uber, for example, when it came on, well, actually, better suggestion, Pokemon Go. I did not play that, but I have several friends that played it whenever it became very popular. It was like 6 or 7 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. Anyway, that tracked your location. It probably, I kind of wish I had downloaded it so I knew a little bit more about it, but it definitely tracked your location when you're using the application, whether the person wanted to or not. And so some kind of changing technology like that is the norm to track someone's location at all times so they can have a better experience? Or is it a norm of, no, that's not what we do. We shouldn't be tracking someone's location, because that would be, if you or I were to track someone's location, we would be labeled a stalker. If a company tracks someone's location, and obviously it goes into context, maybe there's a criminal that we need to keep our eyes on. We have some intel that they're going to excuse me. We have some intel that they're going to commit a crime, so we probably want to track them a little bit more. This goes into the context specific area of our conversation. So it's yeah, needless to say, it's a challenge to use that one and establish what those norms are. Now, what I did mention as far as the historical part of it goes is that we can look at different cases that were tried and what their outcomes were throughout America or whatever other jurisdiction, country you live in. And that can help establish what those norms are that can kind of apply to the context or the domain that you're looking at. Moving on to this third one, Daniel Solove's taxonomy of privacy. So privacy is understood by the activities and mechanisms that violate privacy as described in court hearings. That kind of ties into contextual integrity. However, this is a lot more based around those outcomes of court hearings. For example, Roe v. Wade was a big one. Another one, Griswold versus Connecticut. So the outcomes of court cases like these define what it is that can violate that privacy. For instance, Roe v. Wade was around abortion laws, and so without being able to go in and get an abortion anonymously at any point in time, there's a big argument that does violate someone's right to privacy to receive the healthcare that is needed. So that one will always be a widely debated topic amongst folks on either side of the line, and we're not going to talk about it here because that's not the purpose of it. But this sort of taxonomy of privacy can be helpful when identifying privacy-threatening outcomes of technology. So we want to put in a new system that helps provide discounts to people going into a grocery store, as well as recommended products that they want after they fill out a survey and connect to our Wi-Fi. What are the privacy implications going to be of something like that? So obviously the survey being somewhat of an interrogation tactic, obviously not too extreme. You can always decline to take it. The other one being the surveil your device and know kind of when you come and go from the store, even where you are in the store, if they're tracking your location. And so they know if you spend a lot of time in the bread aisle looking at different types of bread, they know that might be a very consequential decision. So making sure you buy the right bread at the right price is a big deal. And so understanding the privacy threatening outcomes of what sort of technology that you put into play can definitely be something that kind of helps, avoid fines and penalties and build consumer trust and so on. The last one is Ryan Callow's harms dimension. So this is the subjective and objective dichotomy. One is very measurable. The other is more, you know, one is more subjective. One is more just kind of around the perception of harm to the individual. So obviously the feeling of intrusion versus the actual event of intrusion, and which one is, both of them get weighed whenever we're talking about this. We don't choose one over the other. We just kind of look at what happened and what are the subjective and objective harms that came out of something like that. Grocery store tracking my location when I come and go. I may subjectively feel like they are watching me at all times, especially when I'm in the store. And objectively, maybe they're pushing products that I otherwise would not purchase because maybe they want to move that product because it's getting old and stale. So they want to get rid of that inventory as soon as possible so they don't lose money, lose sale, whatever you want to call it. So, say I get sick from that too. That could end up being an objective harm. I definitely would get sick if I was throwing up from eating a bad piece of bread. The challenge on here is just in recognizing the perception of harm is just as likely to have a significant impact as the experienced harm. So I'm going to say that again because that was a bit of a long-winded sentence. I'll say it a little slower too. The challenge in recognizing that the perception of harm, the subjective part of the dichotomy, is just as likely to have a significant impact as the experienced harm, the objective side of that coin. So because basically what that means, we can't measure subjective harm, at least not very well. And so someone claiming that, they feel as though they've been intruded upon, maybe the reality is they are only watched when they enter the store. They're not watched otherwise. Their feeling may be a little bit skewed just because of the impact of whatever they read in the news that day, maybe something that they heard from a friend. It fluctuates. It's not going to be the same every time. I mean, I think a lot of us, if you're listening to this, understand what subjective versus objective means. And so that one's just challenging, especially on the subjective side, to kind of measure the outcomes of privacy-threatening events. So that one just covered, what is privacy? How do we define it? What are some things that cause us to define it as the right to be left alone? This next area, we'll look at it briefly. I mean, very briefly, privacy risks and what these are. Essentially, anyone that's conducted a risk assessment, you'll understand the likelihood times impact equals the risk score. And there's several different categories that can factor in. COVID-19, for example, is a widely used risk assessment tool. Looks at the financial implications. It looks at the impact to reputation. It looks at how widespread the vulnerability might be. And it uses a lot of these different scores, a lot of it primarily subjective. You can definitely have an objective look at it too to get an actual risk score from a range of 1 to 4. So privacy risks follow that same sort of thought process. It's the likelihood a privacy threat will exploit a vulnerability and the impact on that individual. That gives us our risk score. And this doesn't have to range from 1 to 4. That's what COVID-19 does. It can range from 1 to 10. It can range from 1 to 20, 1 to 50, however you want to do it. The CVSS vulnerability scores are range from 1 to 10, 10 being the most severe. So like I said, it can range from any amount of numbering that you'd like. I wouldn't come up with my own if I were you, because there's other people that have already done it. It would probably be a waste of time unless it's very specific to what the organization might need. Some of these different risks that we'll go into a little bit more when we do our other parts of this series And we've already talked a little bit about some of them. But these risks are, I can't say this is not an exhaustive list, and there's a lot of triage that goes out of these. But for those of you that are wanting to write stuff down, we have invasion, that's invasion of privacy, decisional interference, inappropriate collection, inappropriate dissemination, physical harms, embarrassment, phishing for information, phishing attempt, all the phishing training we do. I think everyone on here probably knows exactly what I mean when I say fish, with PH, of course, not the F. But non-malicious insider threats can also be something to consider in doing a risk assessment for privacy risks. I mean, a lot of the times this doesn't occur out of intent. This is just carelessness or honest mistakes by employees. Someone may not realize that sending an email and CCing someone else on that email to an external person, like, for those of you that work in consulting, emailing a client, sending an email with someone else's email CC'd, especially without their consent, GDPR would probably hit you for that. Doing that would reveal that person who CC'd email to the external party, potentially without, so it's just careless, honest mistakes. Maybe they weren't supposed to do that, and it was just supposed to be a one-to-one without any sort of third party involved in the communication. All right, we'll jump into now talking through a couple standards. I'm not going to go into too much detail to any of them, or at least I don't intend to, kind of see what happens. But these are just kind of some different standards out there if you're looking for something on how to jumpstart your privacy program, what you can lean on, what you can leverage. So in 1972, the Fair Information Practices was kind of established by the Health, Education, and Welfare Advisory Committee on Automated Data Systems. In other words, committee from the government. This was primarily just put in place to, like the title implies, how information was shared, kind of standardize that process. This eventually, 5 years later, led to the Fair Information Practices Principles from 1977. The Federal Trade Commission is the one who created these. This guidance was provided, and it's just primarily to businesses in the United States. How can we be better with our information, handling it? There's a few principles, exactly 9. Sorry, and these are transparency, individual participation, authority, purpose specification and use limitation, minimization, quality and integrity, access and amendment, security, and accountability. I'm not going to go into any of these for the sake of time, but please, I encourage you to look it up, fpc.gov/resources/FIPS. You can find all the information that you can possibly need over FIPS on that area. This next one, 3 years later, trying to move forward chronologically in time, we have the guidelines on the protection of transborder flows of personal data. Transborder being United States to Canada, United States to another country, basically. Guidelines on how best to share information with companies and organizations that are not domiciled in the United States. This was established by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. If that sounds like a lot, the short version is the OECD, probably a little bit more well-known by the acronym. But there are 8 guidelines that were established, the collection, and this was probably going to sound somewhat repetitive just because the idea of privacy has kind of been established. There's several different standards or commonalities around those principles. You may see the 4 whatever's of privacy, the 8, the 10, so on. A lot of these will have the same kind of ideas. So one being collection limitation, data quality principle, purpose specification, use limitation, security safeguards, openness and transparency, individual participation, and accountability. So let's fast forward 25 years and get to our, probably not the first. That would be a very strong word to use as first, but we have our first privacy framework. Maybe not the first, sorry. Forget first. We have privacy framework. This was from the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, in other words, 2005. So there are some principles here. Preventing harm, notice, collection limitations, use of personal information, choice, integrity of personal information, security safeguards, access and correction, and accountability. Sounds pretty similar to OECD and what they did 25 years ago. This was just established and kind of redid. You can check out at apec.org for more information on that framework. So, and the gist of the reason for this is that it allows for domestic and international implementations. Similar to what OECD did, but this is just, that was more around data flow. This is around implementing different systems and so on. Fast forward 4 years later, we have the generally accepted privacy principles from the AICPA and the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants, the CICA, in other words. This had 9 components, which this is personally one of my more favorite privacy frameworks to work off of. Each one of them has different sub components, and there can be a whole number of different ones, but essentially they do a great job, in my opinion, of laying out what is needed, what's the idea, the objective of the different components. So we have management, agreement, notice, communication, collection and creation, use, retention, and disposal, access, disclosure to third parties, security for privacy, data integrity and quality, monitoring and enforcement. So this last one, we jump ahead to 2017, is I like to call it the NISTIR, NISTIR, publication 8062, obviously developed by NIST. This was an introduction to privacy engineering and risk management for federal systems, and just established a common vocabulary to communicate various privacy risks and implementation of privacy principles for those federal systems. So the 2 key components that this did introduce was the privacy engineering objectives and then the privacy risk model, and how those 2 areas kind of intertwine together. So we'll jump forward now. We'll get into some data lifecycle area. So this will just kind of cover beginning to end of the data process, and this being, consent and notice. I'd say if you get no consent, then you jump forward to the destruction phase. You skip everything else. You're not allowed to keep the information if you don't get consent or provide notice. Let's say there's a yes. So we get consent notice and it's yes from an individual. That begins, we then collect, we process, we retain, we disclose, and then we eventually get to that destruction once the data no longer is serves its purpose. Once we know exactly what we needed, we do what we needed to do with it, and we don't want secondary use issues to come into play, or we want to stick exactly to purpose specification like we talked about in some of those standard models from earlier. The consent and notice aspect too must occur each time additional processing is needed. So if we did want to use that data we collected for something else, we would need to get consent again. Otherwise, we'd have to destroy it if that's not something that the individual wants to do. But yeah, like I said earlier, if it's no longer needed, it must be deleted if we don't get consent from the individual that we can use it for those additional things. Some of the collection methods that are kind of the easiest ones to categorize, and then stuff triages down from there. We have first party, me giving you my information, me giving you my consent. Surveillance, we talked a lot about this one earlier. Camera recording what's going on in the store. Repurposing of information. This is something we kind of hinted on when we started talking about data lifecycle, but we collected information for one purpose, and now we're going to use it for something different. So that would be another way of kind of collecting information. And the last one being third party. Maybe we went out and bought an anonymized data set from a company that we needed to run analytics on. Marketing firms, a lot of firms, I'm not going to just dog on marketing. A lot of firms do this all the time after anonymizing information. Hopefully they can't be tied back to individuals, or else there is an issue. We talked to them about those fines earlier. The consent options, explicit versus passive, or passive, another word that can be used as implied. So in other words, use of a company's website is implied consent that you are allowing them to collect your information. That's an example of that one. Explicit is me saying, yes, you may collect, checkbox or something on the website, or clicking an agree button. A lot of us have probably seen lately the cookie thing banner come up on our screen every time we visit a website, and you have to select, what information is it that what cookies do you want them to provide you. The additional marketing ones, just the basic functionality ones, you can reject all, deny all, whatever it is that's on there. So those are two examples of explicit versus passive, or implied is what I prefer to call it. And then the perspectives of the data life cycle that drive the privacy control structure. There's two of these. One of them is maximizing information utility. Let's collect so much data so we can use the crap out of it, and just be able to make so many decisions because we have so much information. The other is to minimize privacy risks. So these kind of have a butting of heads in a way. Rather than collecting as much as possible, let's make sure that we get consent and notice, and we only collect for what we need, nothing beyond that. If we're going to secondary process, let's get consent from the individual. So two different areas, maximizing information utility and minimizing privacy risks, are the two primary privacy control structures that the DLC kind of can be based off of when a company is determining and defining their data lifecycle. So this last part, thanks for staying with as well, y'all. So this will be brief, and then we can go into kind of our new segment. That's just gonna be, I enjoy it personally, but anyway, most individuals may say they value privacy, but they are willing to give up their information to obtain a product or service. So you give us your name and email, you get a free shaker bottle, just like something at a CrossFit event I did not too long ago. I was okay getting the free shaker bottle, knowing that I can just unsubscribe later on. A college housing fair, getting free swag for signing up for their apartment email blasts. I'm sure a lot of us have been to various conferences. Give us your name, email, we'll put your business card in for a drawing to win, XYZ for free. You're getting added to an email list after you purchased one item online. This instance might be a little unavoidable. Maybe and this is actually a dark pattern, but whenever you can't, maybe I haven't encountered this, but I'm sure there's stuff out there. You can't finish the purchase unless you create an account. You can't check out as a guest. Let's just say that's out there. That would be something that, it prevents you from taking action and makes you do something to get something, which is a dark pattern. We'll talk more about those in a later segment in this series, but just kind of remembering, most individuals may say they want privacy, but then are willing to give up their information to obtain a product or a service. And a lot of that, they weigh the pros and cons. If all you're doing is giving them your email, maybe your name, for something else for free, knowing you can unsubscribe later, then that's probably something you're willing to take the risk on. But if there's a subscription service you want to sign up for, their free option, but they make you provide credit card information, that might be something where you take a step back and think, this isn't necessary. I shouldn't need to provide credit card information if I'm signing up for a free service. So that wraps up the chapter 1 of Introduction to Privacy. I hope y'all learned something new, and are able, if you took notes, God bless you. If otherwise, hopefully you just enjoyed the sound of my voice talking about different privacy things and what it is, and how we can think about it from a real world perspective. So this next section, and bear with me on the title. I'm doing my best. But I have called it Spoil Sports, Wet Blankets, and Party Poopers. So this is where we'll look at some individuals and organizations that have basically crapped the bed lately. This first one, I got to tell you, this was absolutely hilarious to watch. And probably goes into a bit of a different conversation, more about psychology, and but it was, so Jordan Walker, the director of research and development at Pfizer. This was a couple weeks ago when this happened. So he was caught on hidden camera, which is already a surveillance issue and privacy for those of y'all that have been keeping up. He was caught on camera saying that Pfizer was conducting research to mutate COVID-19 into new viruses to create new vaccines, potentially making it more dangerous. And this is not, although we can get into more of what he said in a second, this is not an uncommon practice of mutating viruses to develop more vaccines. This has been done before. Just the fact that it's COVID-19 definitely struck a chord with a lot of people. And just the fact that, a lot of folks are not too happy with some of the response from COVID-19 that's happened. Doesn't matter which side you're on, whatever. But anyway, that was kind of something that happened not too long ago. It's about a 10-minute video on Twitter. Project Veritas has the footage. I'm not gonna show it, but if you haven't seen it, it's pretty funny. Just because you kind of watch someone in a follow-up video, he mentions that he was lying and saying it to impress his date, which that's a whole nother deal, where you don't think your own life is cool enough, I guess, whatever you want to call it. You don't think your life is cool enough to be truthful on the date, which if you're willing to lie about what's going on, I think hopefully everyone sees that already as just a red flag of like, okay, maybe I don't want to give this person a second chance. Obviously, what was done to him was, probably to a point, maybe they got whoever, so the person that was on the date with him was the one wearing the hidden camera. So they probably I would imagine had an agenda, maybe got some alcohol in them, to the point where he had too many drinks, and what he was saying probably couldn't be, validated. There probably is some truth to it. You don't just you come up with magical things like that. There's some truths to, everything we say. What is the common thing is when someone tells you who you are, believe them, though he was under the influence of alcohol. So there can't be absolute truth in what he was saying from my perspective, at least. But still, that aside, a hilarious video of someone getting just incredibly, maybe he may have had every right to be, but not handling it like an adult, in my opinion. Getting his phone out and started filming the other people filming him, as if we're not going to have the video of them filming him around. So he needs to pull his phone out and film himself too. Anyway, that's all I'll say on that. And where you can find it on Twitter if it's not already been taken down. Another place to go find it, and surprise, surprise, the Daily Wire, more conservative news network. Whatever side of the field you play on, it is an absolutely hilarious video. The next one is our definitely not gonna say super well liked by some folks, but Stephen Curry and his family live out in California. We learned this not too long ago. He is by far one of the more supportive individuals of the Democratic Party. But we also found out he opposes low-income housing that was going to be built near his home over concerns of security and privacy. Now, he's been a supporter of various Democratic pushes, especially out in California, to my knowledge. But it would say, based on his political alignment, it could be somewhat hypocritical to a point. But anyway, the big issue, the fact that someone was able to, I mean, it's public record, so it's not a big deal, but highlighting privacy and security concerns is very, I found the story to be very funny. I wanted to share it with y'all. The facility probably won't end up getting built, not because of the protest, but because the land is just way too expensive. You can find information on MSN as well as CNBC and theblaze.com talking about it. So if we want to jump back to 2021, and this is from CNBC, quoting back in 2021, Steph Curry, uncovering solutions and creating opportunities is something I'm profoundly committed to. Bridging the racial wealth gap is one of the biggest challenges of our generation. We are getting a concrete approach that every organization can take to initiate meaningful progress now. Though I do think that he means well in what he's trying to do, it's just very terrible timing and optics for someone who's fully supports bridging the wealth gap. And he's someone who's on the higher end of the wealth gap, opposing a low-income housing project. And if it does get built, wanting to further segregate himself by building walls around his own home. So, personally, I 100% support someone wanting to be more private about their life, but it's just real bad request to say either don't build it or build more security and privacy around our home. Granted, you probably that's all I'll say on that. Just kind of funny. Wanted to tell you all about that. A couple organizational issues. So we already talked about Twitter and their privacy violations. The alleged privacy and data security issues since Elon took over. So there were a couple chief officers that were brought in front of the FTC for questions as to whether their practices were and plans under Musk are consistent with the 2011 consent order the company agreed to. So the San Francisco 49ers, this happened back in January, and I thought it was funny enough to share with y'all, but they got hit with a consumer privacy suit over a data breach. They violated the CCPA, which, surprise, surprise, being in California. And what ended up happening, let me find it for you. So, cause of action was negligence, breach of implied contract, invasion of privacy, a couple other things. A representative from the Niners said the team does not comment on pending litigation. Of course not. But so the consumer complaint says that in 2017, the NFLPA was hacked, exposed personal information of about 1,200 players, and the 49ers should have done more to guard against a cyber attack. Not that one specifically, but the one that happened very recently that leaked a lot of fan information. out because of lack of security controls. So the team servers were infected with ransomware, and cyber criminals were able to take control of the computer network because of it. So data exposed a lot of consumer information. That's why they're hit with the fine there. Epic Games. This might be something a lot of folks are kind of more familiar with. And we'll talk why here in a second, but team privacy essentially arrives at the FTC. So Epic Games has a penalty of $275 million in and $245 in consumer refunds that they need to give away. The headlines of the FTC's enforcement action against them. And so this was a teen privacy action at the FTC, which had long time been coming. So the protection of 13 to 17-year-olds, even onwards of 18, 19, obviously, and the Epic Games information of those individuals being leaked out during a cyber attack. The other three, I'll quickly cover those. We're kind of getting close to the end of our time together, y'all, but thanks for staying with if you're still here. GoodRx. So the FTC took enforcement for it's under the health breach notification rule against GoodRx. It failed to notify customers of an unauthorized disclosure. So this is still pending, going on right now, and we'll kind of see how it ends up shaking out. But the last kind of update we had on this was the beginning of February. Chegg, our popular MBA help software, if you will. FTC has taken action against them for it had lax data security controls in place, and it exposed a lot of sensitive information about millions of customers. I did not get an email about this. I haven't used it in years, so I'm assuming my information is correct. However, definitely something that needs to be checked on. And last one, Drizzly. The FTC has taken action against them for a data breach that exposed the information of 2.5 million consumers. So those of you that drink that stuff, be on the lookout and be on watch. The last one, we'll give a little regulation and law updates. So there are several states that have come out. This isn't an exhaustive list anymore since it was last put together, but the states that are really just involved in it: Hawaii, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, Vermont, and Washington. There's a lot going on. There's been a lot of push. As a matter of fact, in my predictions, I didn't think there'd be as much state privacy laws being introduced because of the federal push. However, I was wrong in that. I'll cover that later on in my 2023 recap. But anyway, it's great to see that there's so much initiative towards consumer privacy. I think last year when we saw Connecticut and Utah pass theirs, as well as Colorado right before, then Virginia, California too. Since those states have all been able to do it, a lot of states are trying to get on board and get their own state level law, just in the event that the federal law doesn't protect everything. And I know there's some states have information protection in different ways, like the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Specifically here in Texas, there's protections over biometric information as well as social security numbers that companies have to keep protected if they collect it on consumers. But there's not comprehensive consumer privacy law in Texas protecting the general information of each of us. But that'll do it, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. If there's anyone out there that wants to connect, please feel free to find me. LinkedIn, go check out the website, davidprivacyparty.com. Really want to hear from you guys and see how I can make the show a little bit better, more enjoyable experience, and then just how I can continue to get more knowledgeable on this stuff too. This isn't just me trying to regurgitate. I also want to learn too, part of why we do the show. So appreciate the time from everybody today. Next episode topic, we'll get into chapter 2 of the introduction to privacy. And so good way to end the show on that. But all right, Thanks, y'all.